What up, YouTube? I am back with another video. This is my 1996 Cajun fishing ski. So today I'm going to go over the power head removal for a 96-88 Johnson. The last time in the last video I totally forgot to show you the ID number for your motor. If you look back there, that is where your model and serial number is. So if you ever need any parts, you look back there and you get those two numbers and they can get you whatever you want. So, power head removal. Alright. I got this quoted to get repaired. It blew the number one piston, which I did in a previous video. It was like $3,500. I found a place that did power heads for $2,600. And it was like a short block, so it came pretty much all assembled except with without the carburetor, the intake, the airbox, the starter, the flywheel, all the ignition stuff, and obviously all the electrical stuff. So it was basically just an assembled block. So to do the removal, right here is your exhaust housing shield. It's like a plastic cover, whatever you want to call it. Here are two bolts, and it's the same thing on the other side. And then once you remove that, there's another bolt up here and another bolt up there. And that will come on out with removing that bolt over there. And the same thing, that bolt over there. Once you remove that housing, there is 1, 2, 3 on each side, and then there's two nuts up in here. And if you look on the other side, there's a nut and a bolt right there, and it's the same thing on the other side. And you remove all them, the power head is now loose. There's also those mounting bolts right there, and the same thing on the other side. You remove that, the power head is pretty much loose, and that is how you would go about taking the power head off. Now obviously you need to remove all the electrical stuff. If you're doing the thing I did, the flywheel needs to come off, but you can do that off the boat. Alright, so this needs to come off. There's a screw behind here and a screw behind there. You take this plate, snaps off. Remove the number 1 and number 2 wire, because that goes into your for part of your ignition. Then this all comes off. This comes off right here, and then there's a bolt here at the bottom. Then you can take this tie off where the wires sit. Now I have this off because in my last video I'm getting ready to put the exhaust housing back on. So the coils don't have to come off, but like I said, I had to swap the coils on this motor, so you can take them off. They basically bolt there and there and there and there on the bottom. This bolts to your exhaust housing cover. Two go in there. You take them out. There's two screws that cover the plate. That comes out. And there's another wire holder right here. So that you can take that out. You come over here, your other two coils are here. You have to disconnect this guy back in here. And in doing so, you can keep moving the whole entire wiring harness over. Now, you have to disconnect this guy, and these two, here and down there. And then you can disconnect your two bolts here. And that is pretty much where your wiring harness comes into the motor shroud. And in doing all of that, you can pull the whole harness away, and I just set it over here for the power head removal. Alright, now like I said, I had to take it a step further because I was swapping parts over the power head. So you have the starter bolts here. There's one down there below it, and there's one right there. And then I had to disconnect the fuel line coming into the boat, and that is disconnecting your fuel and all your electrical systems. The last thing I will say is the shifting linkage here. Okay, unfortunately, I don't think I can show you. If you can see down in there, right there, that is your shifting linkage. There's a metal pin behind it. You can kind of see it right there. You got to pull that pin out, and then you pull the shifting linkage out. There's a little shifting rod that goes down into the lower unit. It has a very tiny hole on it, so when you're putting it back together, what I did is I used a screwdriver to guide the shifting rod in, and you push it back in. All right, but you always remember to pull that pin. If you're removing the lower unit, I believe you need to put it in reverse. This is all your timing mechanisms, all right? So as your throttle advances, there's a cam that rides on right here. And as that advances, it allows this to pull your timing forward. So you don't really want to disturb that. So essentially what I do is I disconnected it here, and I took this off and popped this out. And you take this off and this bolt back here, not back here, off, and that disconnects your throttle and your shifter cable. You also have to take this and this off, and that pops free. These are your star wheels for your throttle adjustment or shift adjustment. And that is essentially it. Now, like I said, I had to swap the intake and the carbs over and all that. But what I did is I kept the intake one piece without taking the carbs out because my carbs were still synced. So I wanted to try to avoid as much work as possible and make it simpler. The same thing with the timing. I didn't really mess with the timing too much. It had to get fine-tuned when I put it back together, but it wasn't as big of a deal had I took all this stuff off. The only thing I will say is when you remove these, it varies and it's different per boat, but my throttle would not return all the way, so it was idling way too high when I put it together. So what I had to do was turn this star wheel to put more tension to pull this back against the stopper. Now it idles fine. The last thing I will say in regards to the flywheel, you have 3 holes, one here, one here, and one here. Once you take this nut off, you can put your puller in there and pull it out. We actually had to heat it up to get it off. I mentioned this before in a video. I'll mention again. There's a little magnets up underneath of there that works your, I believe your stator, part of your charging system, and your ignition system. You do not want to disturb those magnets at all. So that is for the flywheel removal. You may not have to do that. Just to let everyone know, your thermostat housings are down here as well. And you have to disconnect this rubber elbow and that rubber elbow. And there's a water indicator that you have to disconnect here. That's part of the exhaust housing that's off. These are a very pain in the butt to do. That's a gasket, and that's a gasket. And it's spring-loaded, and then there's 2 thermostats on each side. So you really need a second pair of hands to do that. I'll do that in another video. So that is essentially how you remove a power head. All right? I didn't record it when I did it. There's other videos out there that kind of show how it comes off. Again, I kind of just pointed to the things that need to get taken off. When you're removing the power head, the drive shaft does go up inside the motor. If it's been on the boat for a while, you may need to get a little bit of a pry bar and wiggle it around to get it to break loose. When you're putting it down back on, make sure you grease the splines on the drive shaft, but do not grease the top because it could cause the motor to hydrolock. The last thing I will say is this was my best friend. This is a service manual, so it tells me everything I need to know step by step. I put these little markers in here for shift linkage, timing and synchronization, so I could just turn to it and boom, there it was. You don't need a lot of specialty tools here. Almost everything is 3/8, 7/16, ½ inch, 9/16 was the biggest thing, minus the flywheel nut is pretty big. I want to say it's 1 inch and 5/16. So everything is not very big. Everything does not need to be torqued crazy. I did a 10-hour break-in on this. I think I have about 25 hours in on it now. I went around and retorqued the heads. Make sure you do that because they were loose. After heat cycling the motor, I did the same thing for the power head. I retorqued them. You do not need to animal tighten things because this is all aluminum. Aluminum is a soft metal. The only other thing I will tell you is take plenty of pictures of how your wires were, what color went where. I put everything in baggies and labeled it, so I was able to kind of go forward. The last thing that I totally forgot is this is part of your, for your trimming the motor up and down, you have to disconnect these as well. So just make sure you take pictures of that. And just label everything. You know, it's the same thing if you have to take the coils off. Make sure you label the right coil for the right thing. Labeling and photos are your best friend. I had never done a power head before, but as long as you have a service manual, simple tools, I mean, there's some compounds and stuff over there, and read some forums, watch some YouTube videos. It's not that difficult. And the other thing that I will eventually go over in one of my videos is this is an Evinrude and Johnson. This is a water pump. When you're removing this, sometimes you have to wiggle and the flywheel. Do not ever turn the flywheel backwards because it bends the impeller blades on the water pump and you will need a new water pump. So just always keep that in mind. Like I said, by no means am I an expert. I just kind of went over how I did it and it was not that bad. So again, I hope this helps someone. Just if there's anything you get from this video is get yourself a service manual because it really breaks everything down, including torque specs and all the important things you need. So with that, YouTube, I hope this helps you. Till next time.